The other day, when I was reading a book, I had this thought. How do books even get made? I realized that's something I never really thought about. What happens from when the author finishes the book to it actually landing in the bookstore? Who chooses what even gets printed and what doesn't? So apparently, when it comes to traditional publishing, there are actually a lot of gatekeepers and steps, like getting a literary agent or getting a book deal from a publisher. Then through all of these steps, all the books that people write end up getting filtered down into the books that we see on shelves. So then if you don't go through a publisher, your only option then is to self-publish and release it as an indie book. So people say that the system is designed to keep the standard of the books that come out high. But to me, it kind of sounds like a lot of great stories are probably falling through the cracks. To be honest, this isn't something I really have paid attention to in the past. So if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think I've ever read an indie self-published book before. So I thought it would be fun to only read indie books for a week to see what they're actually like. Are they really all that different from their traditionally published counterparts? Could these non-traditional niches and topics actually make me like them more? But first, let's find some books. I feel like what I've typically heard about indie books so far is that they're typically in the fantasy genre, so let's start there. I was able to find a decent list going in r/fantasy. It seems like everyone loves this one, The Sword of Kaigen, so let's get that one. And then I want to get one more for the week. I generally read more literary fiction-y type books, so I thought it'd be fun to get a indie literary fiction book. But to be honest, they were actually incredibly hard to find. First, I tried Goodreads, which has these lists, but I couldn't really tell if they were even accurate. So I just went to good old Google instead. I guess literary fiction is just less common for self-published books versus genre fiction. But I came across a post about self-publishing from Nicole Deaker, who actually self-published her book. And it's described as a millennial-era Little Women. And for those who have seen my previous videos, you might have heard how much I love Little Women. So this really sounds like a book I would love about a family, their everyday life, very cozy vibes. So let's read that one. So I finally got around to finishing our indie books, so let's talk about them. So first, I'll start with The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. And you know how people make jokes about when you're reading fantasy books and you just have these crazy pronunciations in your head? I feel like this video is really about to expose me for my crazy pronunciations of things. But I have to say, this book is incredible. I mean, I should have expected as much given the love that I saw for it on Reddit, but I would actually say it was as good, if not better, than people had described. So it's centered around this warrior family whose 14-year-old son is studying and aiming to become a great warrior, as is the legacy of this family. And this is a society of tradition and honor as seen through this area being nicknamed the Sword of Kaigen, with its long history of protecting the region. And then one day that son, his name is Matsuda Mamoru, meets this new student who claims that this entire world, as he understands it, is actually built on lies and propaganda. To me, this book really succeeded on all fronts. It has a super engaging plot, which honestly really surprised me at times. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And a cast of really well-rounded characters through this family who you come to learn a lot more about and ultimately deeply fall in love with. And the second book I read was actually the Biographies of Ordinary People, Volume 1 by Nicole Deaker. It was described as a millennial-era Little Women, and honestly I feel like it really lived up to that. It's a story about an ordinary family with 3 daughters, Meredith, Natalie, and Jackie, and we get to know each of them and watch them grow up. So I just read the first book. There are 2 books in total, and the first one runs from the family moving into a new town all the way until Meredith goes to college. And while I will say it took a while to kind of get into it and get to know these characters, the characters ultimately are super relatable and lovable. It's such a perfect, feel-good, cozy read. And like Little Women, it's more about everyday life, like playing with your sisters, making new friends. But because it's set in the very recent past, it's kind of nostalgic at the same time, with a lot of mentions of cassette tapes and film rolls and things like that. So did I feel like I was reading indie books? Honestly, not really. I will admit, I do think when I was doing research for indie books to read, I do feel like their book covers can be a little lacking if that is important to you. But the stories, the characters, and even the writing was just as compelling to me. I do think though with these books that I've picked, they're probably more popular indie books. So if I were to do this again, I do think it would be interesting to have a selection that's maybe more niche and more obscure. But yeah, let me know if you've read any of these or if you have any indie book recs in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time.